Welcome. Shvot Tov. Okay, so before we start the next chapter of the book of Ezra, wanted to discuss a little bit about Mashiach, the differences between Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. So a driving concept by Talmudic principle behind this idea of mine would be Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labanim. The ways of the forefathers are a precursor, or in some sense, an augur for the ways of the children. Even simple acts of the forefathers is brought down repeatedly in the Medrash as like a prophecy of what would happen for the children. For example, when in the end of Genesis, when Joseph and Judah sat down together for a meal in peace. So it's described in the Medrash, I believe the Medrash Rabbah, as an augur for the future time when Judah and Joseph will be united in the Holy Land in Mashiach time. Okay, so there's a couple of verses in Genesis that connect us to a lot of these concepts as discussed in the teachings of the Vilna Gaon. And so in relation to Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. So Mashiach ben David has to be, Mashiach ben David is the Messiah we're really waiting for. And it has to be one human, an individual who fulfills certain things. We're also going to be quoting from Rambam. So you'll need the Laws of Kings if you want to follow along. Otherwise, I'll just quote from that. But otherwise, just going to stick to the Tanakh using the Stone edition. Okay, so we're waiting for Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef, though, fulfills many of the prophecies, if not most of the prophecies concerning Mashiach. However, there's a major difference between Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben David has to be one individual, a descendant of King David, who fulfills certain things which have yet to occur as of this recording. So that means Mashiach didn't come yet. But Mashiach ben Yosef has to prepare for Mashiach. So now let's discuss a couple more Maimari Chazal sayings of the Talmudic sages. There's a Mashiach in every generation, right? But for Mashiach ben David to come, Mashiach ben Yosef has to come first and do certain things. So what we effectively had was that in every generation there was a Mashiach ben Yosef active, and in every generation there was a potential Mashiach ben David doing great mitzvahs to be ready to be Mashiach if that generation was worthy. So that means we've had many Mashiach ben Yosefs. There's other interpretations. Mashiach ben Yosef is like an epoch in time that enough mitzvahs done in a certain way achieve a certain result. But we're going to go more literal according to the prophecies. The wars of Gog and Magog, the first two wars in Ezekiel, are definitely talking about Mashiach ben Yosef's time. So therefore, for the purposes of this class, we're going with the opinions that Mashiach ben Yosef is a human being, but not necessarily an individual human being. So now, what is the Maimer Chazal that we could, the saying of the holy sages of the Talmud? What's one of their sayings that we could connect this concept to? And again, I'm trying to teach us separately from the way the Vilna Gaon taught it, so that you could see, so that the echo we do here supports his findings. You know what I'm saying? So in the Chazal, when they say that Mashiach ben Yosef can come, they're saying that just a minute. I'm sorry. I'm in recovery from chemotherapy, so sometimes I have moments I have to. Baruch Hashem. Thank God. Ben Hamer from Tsar Agra. Ben Hay says, according to that, effort is the reward. The harder it is to do a mitzvah, the bigger reward you get. Baruch Hashem. I guess we're getting more reward tonight, so that's good.
I've heard you say that 1,000 times. Do I ever get tired? I don't. I like having you here.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Baruch Hashem. It's good to know my son still
No
likes
problem.
me. Yeah. Baruch Hashem. All right. So, all right. Let me. I'll quote Chazal further after we get into some of the verses, so we can start to get into the scriptural mechanics behind it, and then we'll also go into the Rambam's discussion about Mashiach in the Laws of Kings. So, all right. Okay. So the difference between Mashiach ben yeah, now I remember Mashiach ben Yosef. So why this was my question. Why can Mashiach ben Yosef be multiple people as opposed to Mashiach ben David? It's because Masa Avosim and Labanim. Again, this is my personal perspective on it. But again, if you were to study the writings of the Vilna Gaon and his Talmidim and students on this, so it would echo this and support it, in my opinion. So, Masa Avosim and Labanim, Yosef at Tzaddik had a different philosophy from Yehuda ben Yaakov. If you follow the Midrashim, so the you see that there are 5 sons of the 12 sons of Yaakov who were uh, really the bosses of the among the children. All the other children were did not seem to try to even voice an opinion. They simply let these 5 deliberate what they should be doing. Those were the first 4 sons of Leah and the first son of Rachel. That's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, from the sons of Leah, and then son of Rachel, first son of Rachel, Yosef. Yosef was a Bechor, firstborn of Yaakov's favored wife. So therefore, even though he was extremely young, younger than all the other brothers besides Binyamin, nevertheless, he was treated like an equal in some ways than his brothers. Really, at a spiritual level, he personally was at a higher level than all of his brothers, including Levi and Yehuda in that generation. Okay. So the philosophy of let the elders lead was the philosophy of the 4 brothers, including Yehuda. But the philosophy of Joseph, we see in the Medrash, he supported the idea that the sons of the handmaids, that would be uh, uh, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. So all these should be treated as equals, and everybody should have an opinion and a vote, etc. So the philosophy of Joseph, and therefore the philosophy of Mashiach ben Joseph, is that we're all equal. So whenever there's a fight for Jewish rights, equality among the nations, uh, so then it's an aspect of the battle of Mashiach ben Yosef to try to assert rights, and of course not every battle is physical. Some of it is could be metaphysical. Some of it could be intellectual. So the drive to have equality and the fight against anti-Semitism is actually the kelim, the utensils of Mashiach ben Yosef, not Mashiach ben David. Whereas Judah liked the idea of hierarchy. The elders should lead, those who deserve should be uh, receiving what they deserve first before those who don't deserve. So, in other words, a higher level of reward for the righteous and punishment for the wicked. It's not seeking equality at most costs. It's seeking what's truly just. So, um, in other words, putting justice first before kindness. Whereas Joseph's philosophy is put kindness first before justice in some senses. We see that Joseph was tested with a perversion of kindness, immorality. And so you see, just like the merciful Abraham had to be tested with being ordered to slaughter his son, but God never really intended that. But for Abraham, the test was he had to fight his nature was to do kindness. He had to fight his nature to do kindness to be prepared to do cruelty. That was his great test. Yosef's great test was his desire to do chesed before justice had to be on the testing block, so to speak. So his philosophy is chesed, and chesed, if it's not depending on justice, so it could be done in any generation, whether or not Israel is independent, whether or not Israel is in the exile. So we've been in a time of Mashiach ben Yosef, an era of Mashiach ben Yosef, since the time of the destruction of the temple. Mashiach ben David's time is a time of justice, when not only is there Jewish independence, Jews are equal to, just as Joseph would want, but that there's justice. Jews have freedom of religion. They could build a temple on their Temple Mount if they want to, right? So we're seeing, as far as a era goes, we're seeing a closing of the fulfillment of the role of Mashiach ben Yosef, and an enabling of a natural way to get to the Mashiach ben David time. Okay, so now let's look at a couple of verses that tell us more about the differences between Joseph and Judah. And again, Ma'aseh Avosim Labanim, the ways of the forefathers, the precursor for the future generations. So it'll teach us more about Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, who comes from Judah. Okay, so Joseph, this is going to be a quotation from Genesis chapter 50. Okay, so let's look at verses 19 and 20 and and 21. 19, 20, and 21 in the last chapter of Genesis, chapter 50. But Joseph said to them, "Fear not, for am I instead of God? Although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, in order to accomplish it is as clear as this day, that a vast people be kept alive. So now fear not, for I will sustain you, you and your young ones." Then he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So Joseph was being Joseph, tzaddik, higher level than his brothers, and he was acting like it. He was being magnanimous when he had finally had an opportunity to take revenge. Remember, Asa, he was looking forward to getting rid of his brother when his father passed away. Joseph was even kinder to his brothers when his fathers passed away. Oh, they're suffering because they just lost their father. The kindness of Joseph. But also, it's that I will sustain you and your young ones. Your young ones are the same as you, right? And and he said them to all as equals, all the brothers with one statement, right? Okay. So now let's look at a verse talking about Judah. This is in Genesis chapter 38. So the background, of course, Tamar, who was pledged to be the to be the wife of Judah's third son, Shelah, uh, turned out that when Judah was afraid to give his son to her because his first two sons passed away when they married her. But he didn't tell her go away. He just refused to give her a husband when she was already betrothed. So now again, in those days, betrothal was the first stage of marriage. So technically, she was already married to Shelah by Torah law, which again the forefathers were trying to follow the Torah law. The from the time of Abraham, the Jews followed Torah law even though it wasn't yet commanded. Okay, so we see that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were able to follow the Torah law completely. But we see that Joseph and the brothers were not able to follow the Torah completely, even though they wanted to. For example, with Joseph, perfectly righteous, but as viceroy of Egypt, he was forced to dress like an Egyptian. Obviously, not only not the regular Jewish conceptions of modesty among the religious Jews, but especially the Torah commandment of don't have rounded corners, to have side locks. Unfortunately, Joseph was not able to have. So therefore, he could not fulfill that Torah law. It was against his will, but he couldn't fulfill it. Also, we find by Judah, he ended up marrying his his pledged daughter-in-law, which according to Torah law would be normally adultery. But in his case, again, he was trying to keep this Torah law before it was commanded. It was not adultery in this case because there was no two stages of marriage. The laws for a Gentile b'nai Noach, they have to be living together to be married. And and Tamar never married according to laws of b'nai Noach. She never married Shelah. So it was just like a personal stricture in the family to consider her married, except that if she had behaved in a way that was destructive. So, in other words, what she should have done was say she was no longer interested in marrying Shelah, but to make him feel betrayed, etc. So now it was a question of according to Noahide law in there. Um, did she have a death penalty? Was a death penalty upon her? So there was a Beth Din convened. The measure says that Isaac, Jacob, and Judah were on the Beth Din. So now, even though the same chapter says Judah had went down from his brothers, and the commentators describe that he went down spiritually. Nevertheless, as far as being a great Torah scholar, he was a leading scholar in his generation. In fact, remember when Jacob said he wanted to prepare for the descent to Egypt. He sent Yehuda ahead of the family, right? So that was in Genesis. I believe that was 46, something like that. Yeah, chapter 46, verse 28. Jacob sent Judah. He sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to prepare ahead of him in Goshen, and they arrived in the region of Goshen. Our translation follows the first reading in the Medrash, but there's a second reading brought down in Rashi that because of the Hebrew word for to prepare is actually lahoros, which is very often used as describing to teach Torah. And in the Medrash Agada that Rashi quotes, it uses the language of Beis Hora, a house of Hora, which Hora is classically used as a yeshiva for teaching advanced Torah studies, like to Paskin Shal, to decide Torah law. So therefore, from this we see two different midrashim attesting that Judah was a level of a rabbi of a Beth Din, higher than a regular rabbi. So Judah was, even though we know Levi and Issachar were forefathers of many great Torah scholars, nevertheless, in that generation, even though Joseph was the most righteous, Judah was the greatest scholar, apparently, at least among the other brothers. Yeah. That's Genesis 46:28. And in the Hebrew, again, the language lahoros. And again, look at Rashi's quote from the Midrash Agada for that terminology. So then back to Genesis 38. So in verse so she was Judah decreed that she was turned to harlotry. So now why did he say harlotry and not adultery? Because Tamar was actually the daughter by Shem ben Noach, Shem ben Noach. So he apparently he gave birth to her later in life. So and Shem ben Noach was considered a Kohen, high priest to God, and so was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So someone who is a high priest, uh, their daughter has more strict requirements to avoid disrespecting the God that the high priest of the world represents. So because she was the daughter of one of the great representatives of God, so therefore she was held to higher standard, and according to her stature, she deserved a death penalty if she committed adultery. But again, she explained that Judah had put her in an impossible situation, and she knew through prophecy that she was destined to marry into the family of Judah and be a foremother of many righteous people. So therefore, she did what she could to fix Yehuda's mistake. So when Yehuda, so then what she said was, she didn't say, you did this to me. She said, recognize these things, these items that I was given by the person uh, who did this with me. And Yehuda said, um, verse 26 of chapter 38, Judah recognized and he said, she is right. It is for me, inasmuch as I did not give her to Shelah, my son. Yeah. Now, the translation here, and he was not intimate with her anymore. That's a discussion. According to some, he remained he remained her husband, and he was intimate with her. But so we see that again, either way, whether or not it was more than that one time or not, Judah, for the purpose of being strict about following the laws of Sinai before it was the Torah was given, just like Joseph, he was also compelled to not follow all the laws. Now, what's happens in the generation before Mashiach comes? It's a generation before that Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, right? So Ma'aseh Avos Lebanim. That means again, a generation without the temple. Half of the mitzvahs of the Torah, half of the 613 mitzvahs, are connected to the Binyan Mikdash. All the laws of the korbanos, the sacrifices, all the laws of Tuma and Tara, except for the laws of Nida and family purity, are all connected to uh, having a temple. So that's half of the commandments right there. So, in other words, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David are born in a generation where they're forced to not keep all the laws of the Torah. But they keep everything that they can keep. Similarly, Joseph kept everything he could keep. From Talmudic perspective, um, again, the Talmudic concept of onus rachmana patri, if someone is forced to do a sin, they're not held accountable. Merciful God forgives people if they're forced. Like we see the case of a woman who was overpowered for immorality. She's not held accountable for that. And so too, Joseph and Judah didn't intentionally try to violate the Torah. It was not their choice. Similarly, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David are born in a generation where they don't have a choice to keep half of the mitzvahs of the Torah because there's no temple in existence during the time of their birth and upbringing. Okay. Okay, so what's the difference between Joseph's decrees and Judah's decrees when he was in a position of authority as a leader of a tribunal with the power to grant life or death, right? We see an example of Judah's perspective when life and death was in his hands. He wanted maximum fulfillment of God's honor. What's right is right. It must happen. And then when it became an embarrassing situation, he didn't try to hide, you know, oh well, she should have told me. Tough luck for her, you know. And what he said was, she's in one translation of this, she's more righteous than I am. You know that said kami many. She's righteous from me. Is another translation as in here in our school. So Judah, at all costs, even at his own embarrassment, demanded there be justice. And justice at that moment, before Tamar's evidence, it was that she died for dishonoring the institution of the high priest that her father represented. The moment she gave evidence that it was, this is what Judah did, really, then there had to be justice. It didn't matter if he had to shame himself in front of the world. He had to admit the truth. You understand? So we see here the differences just here in Genesis. We already see differences between the philosophy of Mashiach ben Yosef and the philosophy of Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef wants everyone to be equal, to be treated fairly. If you don't treat the children of the maidservants as equals, we're all sons of Jacob. So therefore, it's not fair. So it's not. For example, anti-Semitism is not fair. This is a voda, a service, and and a part of the spiritual war of Mashiach ben Yosef to fight anti-Semitism, to fight injustice. Even it's very similar. We find with in the Zionist state of Israel is similar to this Mashiach ben Yosef concept. So now, Mashiach ben Yosef, remember Yosef, he for the last for the last for the majority of his adult years, he was not able to have payos, side locks. So he wasn't allowed to keep the Torah completely from the perspective of the Sinaitic covenant, which in his generation didn't occur yet. But it was not a ma'akev for his role. It was not a barrier. Judah, it was only in this concept and in that moment that he gave it. So this explains why there is an opinion that Judah never returned to her as a husband and wife, because there has to be justice, and she got married to him without justice. But because really he started the whole process by delaying it unfairly, this explains why Judah probably married her and stayed her husband, because it would be unjust after all he put her through to not let her have a husband when she's suddenly going to have his kids. So this explains both opinions. But in the perspective of that, our discussion of Judah in this debate is all similar to the process of Mashiach ben David. There has to be justice. Our discussion of Joseph is, it doesn't matter if he couldn't fulfill a commandment or not. He was saving lives, right? He was nourishing the entire generation. Even if he couldn't have side locks, probably the Levitic priests in Goshen had side locks, right? So he was enabling these mitzvahs. So from the perspective of Mashiach ben Yosef, it doesn't matter if he personally was religious, even though of course he was in every other way. But for his mission, as far as Mashiach ben Yosef, not Yosef Atzadik, but we see Masavas. Whereas Mashiach ben Yehuda, at every moment there has to be justice. If he leaves Tamar, it's because of justice. If he stays with Tamar, it's because of justice. At no point is there not justice. Okay? So therefore, Judah must have justice. Mashiach ben David must live a just life. Mashiach ben Yosef, again, his attitude, everyone's equal. So that, to the point that it's even discussed by our sages that Mashiach ben Yosef can be from other tribes besides Joseph. Why? Remember, Joseph wanted to minimize the role of the leaders of the house of Jacob. Instead of Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and Joseph being the bosses, everyone should be a boss. Everyone should be equal. So therefore, if he's going to advocate for the other tribes, so Joseph's own philosophy is, Mashiach can be from any tribe, but what does it matter? We're all servants of Hashem. We're all the sons of Jacob. You understand? Whereas Judah, no, Mashiach there could only be one. There was one Moshe Rabbeinu. There has to be one Mashiach. And if you have too many Mashiachs, so then it creates too many religions in the world. There's not true honor to the God of the Jewish people unless there's only one Mashiach, right? So this is the philosophy of Judah, and that's why either Mashiach ben David comes or he cannot come. But there must be one, and there can only be one. You understand? Now that Mashiach is destined to reignite the dynasty of David, to have kings following him. At a minimum, he, his son, and his grandson will rule over Israel. So, so we see that the role of Joseph is equality of everything, kindness first before pure justice. The role of Judah and Mashiach ben David is justice first. So now here in the time of exile, remember I told you before that in exile is the time of Mashiach ben Yosef. So our prayers in Shemon Esrei, in the main body of our prayers that we say 3 times a day, 4 times on Shabbos, 5 times on, we don't really say it on Yom Kippur, but okay. So, but on the weekdays we say 3 times a day. that Melech Tzedakah Mishpat, the king who loves uh, Mishpat, Tzedakah Mishpat, charity and righteousness. But in Tanakh, usually you will find the formula, and we discuss this in classes and video. You could also find it on my rabbinical blog, rabbifriedlander.wordpress.com, that the usually you find the phrase mishpat tzedakah, and you find this phrase over 20 times in Tanakh. So, uh, so mishpat tzedakah, the aim of Tanakh is putting mishpat first, the philosophy of Mashiach ben David. The order of the Jewish prayers in the Orthodox Siddur is tzedakah mishpat, putting kindness first. The philosophy of Mashiach ben Yosef, because again we're in Gullus time, so the Mashiach ben Yosef time is and philosophy comes first. Okay, so now what does that mean? So that means even somebody who's not yet fully religious can participate in the Mashiach ben Yosef part. You could have a great advocate against anti-Semitism who doesn't keep any commandments. And it's contributing towards the role of Mashiach ben Yosef, right? Whereas Mashiach ben David must be religious. Okay, so now how do we know Mashiach ben David must be religious? The prophet tells us. Okay, so use your handy dandy Tanakh, and please turn to Isaiah chapter 11. Okay, verses verses 1 through 5, using the Art Scroll translation. A staff will emerge from the stump of Jesse, and a shoot will spread from his roots. Again, this is chapter 11, verses 1 through 5 of Isaiah. The spirit of Hashem will rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and strength, a spirit of knowledge and fear of heaven, of Hashem. He will be imbued with a spirit of fear for Hashem, and he will not need to judge by what he sees, his eye sees, nor decide by what his ears hear. He will judge the destitute with righteousness and decide with fairness the humble of the earth. He will strike the wicked of the world and the rod of his mouth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be the girdle around his loins, and faith will be the girdle around his waist. See, this exactly in the model of Judah, not in the model of Joseph. But so, but the last verse applies very much to Joseph. Joseph, the righteousness, the girdle around his loins, the faith, the girdle around his waist. He was righteous, in the house of Potiphar, and didn't commit immorality. So since Yosef emulated Mashiach, so he too was worthy to become a forefather of Mashiach. So this explains why we find Mashiach is Mashiach ben Yosef. He's not Mashiach ben Levi. He's not Mashiach ben Reuven, right? He's Mashiach ben Yosef. Because Yosef, on a personal level, was closer to Mashiach ben David than anyone in his generation. But he was Yosef. So therefore, it's like God compensated him. He will also have a Mashiach from him. Okay, but from Yosef's own philosophy, all the tribes are equal. So if indeed, according to those who say there's a Mashiach in every generation, including Mashiach ben Yosef in every generation, including Mashiach ben Yosef actually acting in every generation, so therefore we've had, past 50 generations, we have 50 Mashiach ben Yosefs, still waiting for the first Mashiach ben David. Okay, so according to that idea, so Yosef doesn't mind sharing the glory. So you could have had people from different tribes fulfilling the role of Mashiach ben Yosef, and lo ichbad lo, it wasn't any bother to him whatsoever. He didn't mind at all. Ben David ben Yehuda, there must be justice. There is a hierarchy. There is a reality that someone who's more righteous deserves. King David was promised by God in Jeremiah that God would never abandon his children. Therefore, Mashiach ben David must come from David. It cannot be any other tribe. Do you understand? So this is completely in line with the very behavior of Yehuda ben Yaakov. So see, myself and Sim Labanim, Joseph's flexibility in philosophy allows Mashiach ben Yosef to be from any tribe. So therefore, we see people who whether from any tribe whatsoever, whether they are completely religious or not, can fulfill the role of Mashiach ben Yosef to an extent. Yeah, generally speaking, the more righteous a person, the more successful they are. So there may be like even more than one Mashiach ben Yosef in a generation. Why? Why not? Everyone's equal, right? To Joseph, there were 12 leaders in the family of Jacob, right? There wasn't just one, right? So according to the philosophy, he wouldn't mind if there's every tribe had a Mashiach ben Yosef. You see, and you see his great kindness is his own reward, so that it may be in fact that there were always 12 Mashiach ben Yosefs in every generation. So when the Great Techias Mason comes, we may find that there's been hundreds of Mashiach ben Yosefs, all as a reward to Yosef at Tzaddik. And it'll be very interesting when the Great Resurrection occurs. We can uh, piece all this together. But this is just my supposition. Okay, so okay, came narrowly. This is my supposition. But you see, it fits in perfectly. The ways of the forefathers, the ways of these forefathers, the description of Mashiach ben David, it all fits in perfectly, I think. Okay, let's open the floor to questions. Any questions about this topic?
And so, Rabbi, when you're talking about Mashiach ben Yosef, and he doesn't have to be, from the tribes of Yosef, do you know of any sources or anything that says that he doesn't have to be from any of the tribes of Israel? Can he be from outside the tribes of Israel?
Mashiach ben Yosef has to be Jewish.
Has to be Jewish.
People could help Mashiach ben Yosef, or they could help Mashiach ben David. Remember, Hiram entered heaven alive because he helped David and Solomon, right?
Yeah.
So you could be a helper of a Mashiach. You don't have that's so even Mashiach ben David, anyone could be a helper of Mashiach ben David,
Yeah.
but there can be but one. You understand?
But Hira,
Uh,
who was Yehuda's friend, was also Hiram.
uh,
Is
well, that's also a midrashic debate.
Okay.
For that to be true, it would have been many years later. But again, we do have examples of people living over 400 years, 300 years at least, in those days.
Wasn't part one of them, for example, who lived over 400 years?
Right. According to the Medrash that Pharaoh from the time of Moses went to Nineveh and led them, so then he would have had to have lived hundreds of years. We know explicitly, but that's it could be a euphemism. Pharaoh is the king, this so he's a spiritually the same person, perhaps a Gilgal, etc. But he just um, but he was actually two different people. It could be either way. But we know explicitly someone like Sarah Bas Asher, she lived from the time of King Jacob's blessing to her to live forever until King David's time, and she only died because uh, not everyone is cut out to live forever in a world where everyone keeps dying. So she kept making friends, and they all died. Making friends, and they all died, and this repeated for hundreds of years, until the point that she asked King David to pray that God release her from the blessing of Jacob, and so she could also pass on and you know so it's sometimes blessings can be difficult, but generally speaking, we always try
I
to
want
choose
that
life.
blessing so I can live forever.
We always try to
Like
choose life.
like Eliyahu Nabi. I want that blessing to live forever.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. So God is very merciful, and when after the great resurrection, when people come back to life, so uh, according to Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, so people will live no less than 100 years, and some will live up to 1,000 years. Uh, whereas with according to Rizal, people live forever once after the great resurrection. But Ramchal says that people need to have a eternal reward that's greater than what our bodies can bear. So therefore, we have to go to the world of souls for that. For example, when the example I use is that when people are want to laugh so hard, sometimes they start to cry because their body cannot express that joy. So and Chazal discuss that the reward for the righteous is um, at least 500 times greater than it is in this world. Uh, so therefore, there is it's impossible for our bodies as they are to endure such great levels of joy. Uh, Whereas according to our Arizal, our bodies are elevated to the extent that they become strong enough they can endure such joys. Very good. Okay, any other questions? Comments? Okay, so if you hear Elio Navi is going around announcing Mashiach, please share the news. And Baruch Hashem, I was looking forward to it. All right, thanks for joining us. And now we're going to try to learn some Book of Ezra. Let's pause the video here and